Hello everyone. So today in my presentation, I will present about assessing listening skills. So in my presentation, I'll go through three sections. The first one is listening. What is listening? The second one is listening types, and the third one is finding materials for listening. So first, let's get started with what is listening. So, in listening definition, it is receiving language through ears, identifying sounds of speech, and converting them into message that is able to understand. So, there are six components of listening. The first one is hearing. Hearing is the psychological process of receiving sound and other stimuli. After that, people would focus attention on external stimuli. Next, they will decode the symbols or behavior attended to, and then they will decide the value of information to the receiver. Next, they will place the appropriate information into short-term or long-term storage, and then finally, they will give feedback to the source or other receivers. So next we'll go to the kinds of listening texts. Listening texts can be classified according to the content, complexity, authenticity, and so on. Dialogue and monologue are universally acknowledged to be the main types of listening texts. So while monologue is a long speech which is delivered by one person only, dialogue is a conversation between a group of two or more people. So for international students whose second language is English, they usually use English listening for two purposes: studying purpose at school and privacy purpose in daily life, like entertainment or conversation. However, in this presentation, I'll focus on on study purpose only, and especially in testing. In Vietnam culture of testing, there are not many listening tests, and students may have to get a listening certificate through a big exams like mm, national entry exam or international exam like IELTS. So most of listening text should contain dialogues for for general ELT course, for example, like for the starter and for the intermediate levels, as as they are the significant part of authentic communication. And the first section of listening is usually the conversation section. So the topic of the conversation can be diverse, but it is will be about everyday situation, like two acquaintances discuss about the weather. That is the reason why the language used in this section usually authentic and natural. At the higher level, like ELT and ESP, and for the intermediate and advanced levels, the role of monologue is enormously increased. In the text, a monologue part is usually the second of four sections, and student will receive roughly 10 questions to answer for it. The topic of this monologue part can be varied, but it will likely to be about everyday situation in social context, like someone talking about what they do at work and giving details about something. Therefore, the amount of academic vocabularies in this section is increased. Uh, Here are the few examples about monologue and dialogue that we usually encounter in both exam and reality. For example, monologue, it can be form of public announcement or instruction, public lectures, presentations, and speeches, and so on. And dialogue can be form of public debates, discussion, interpersonal dialogues, and conversation. So in the next section, we would go to listening types. So first, we'd go to kind of listening. So there are six kind of listening, which is reactive listening, intensive listening, responsive listening, selective listening, extensive listening, and interactive listening. So first, we will come to reactive listening. So this is usually a short listening exercise where the students pay attention to the heard sound, not the general meaning. So basically, this exercise does not require students to interpret all of the contents of the paragraph, and the overall understanding is unnecessary. The purpose of this kind of listening is to check whether the student can identify sounds correctly or not. And the example of this kind is going to be a dictation task. Like the student will hear the record twice. For the first one, they only listen to the record, and it will be and the record will be played with natural voice and speed. For the second time, they will listen to the record again and write down everything they hear. At this time, the record will be played slow and paused. So in this so in this task, student will listen and perform a transformation of what teacher says. And this task is listening single sound assessment and does not require student to understand the whole text. Coming up next, we're going to intensive listening. So this is a brief listening exercise that involves in detail analysis of language used for specific information. Teacher usually uses this to check if the student can recognize the form of the used language correctly or not. The form can be grammar or phoneme and so on. So here are the example of this kind of listening. You can hear the student can hear the record once and then choose which is the script for that sentence. So the exercise here focuses on phonological elements like the ending sound. So if one cannot catch the ending sound of the word chest, he would choose the wrong answer. Next, we would go to responsive listening. So this is an exercise which involves in interpretation and response. For example, like respond to a command. When teacher gives this kind of exercise to student, the teacher can gain information, identify problems, and improve the accuracy of student communications through their answer. The example of this kind of exercise, kind of listening is that student will hear a record once and then choose what is the answer for that sentence. If the student does not understand the meaning of the question, he might choose an incorrect answer. So next, we would go to selective listening. So this exercise would involve in extracting and confirming the relevant information. So the purpose of selective listening is to check for listening comprehension. For example, as you can see, this kind of exercise usually have example in IELTS Task 1 listening test. And the student here will have to understand the message of the listening text so that he can notice the relevant details and ignores what is unnecessary. So next we would go to extensive listening. So this kind of exercise involves in the longer text, like the amount of listening text in this type of listening is larger than usual, and it can be a lecture or a 5-minute video. In this exercise, students must also get the overall message of this text. And in this type, students can do the exercise without being controlled by the pre-test questions, noticing the specific information or noticing the detail. The purpose is that teacher can apply this type of listening to check for student understanding and also improve the student's listening fluency. Like here, as you can see, the example, the student can watch the video twice about history lecture in a high school and take note of the keynotes in this video. So in this exercise, above, student can do not have to know every single word that they have listened, and they just need to get the general meaning and get the key points. And finally, we would go to the final kinds of listening is interactive listening. So the student here will need to concentrate on the spoken text without falling out of touch with the speakers and can be able to reply efficiently. In this kind, teacher can use listening to practice and check other skills and also speaking skill. Um, Here are the exercise. Here are the example of this kind of listening. Like a student will hear a part of a conversation in a convenience store, and they can only hear one side of the conversation only, and they have to predict for what they are going to hear from the other side of the dialogue. So in this exercise, students would only need to focus on the question and would come up with a sufficient response. In Vietnam high school, teachers tends to use extensive type and listening types and intensive listening types. As intensive listening would require detailed analysis and which can support students in learning language. This supporting type can help them realize the listening difficulties which really needed for the poor listener. And extensive listening would uh, and extensive listening would ask students to have general comprehension rather than language noticing, which can be a time-saving type. This task would be helpful for the advanced learners. And in Vietnam High School, each class contains about 50 students from variety of listening levels. So applying these two types can help teacher deal with every kinds of students. We are going to the next feature in this the second section is listening difficulties. So there are four basic factors that add difficulties in listening process. They are message, the speaker, the listener, and also the physical setting. So first, we will come to the message. In the message, the content, the linguistic features, and other factors would be listed as the thing that cause difficulty. So the content is what the message is delivered. So if the listening task involves in different culture materials, the listener may not understand as they have different culture norms. Students can be confused if the content is not well organized also, and the listening material may deal with almost any area of life, like street gossip, proverbs, and new products, and so on. So sometimes students may not get the ideas of the message since they are strange with with that area. So about the linguistic feature, linguistic feature is what the linguistic barriers are. So in liaison, uh, the first one is liaison. Liaison is the linking of words in speech when the second word begins with a vowel. For example, in the sentence, my name is Anne can be pronounced into my name is Anne. And the next one is elision. Elision is leaving a sound or sounds in rapid speed. Like for example, the sentence I don't know can be pronounced quickly into I don't know. And then the homophone. Homophones are the words which have the same pronunciation but have different spelling and meaning. Like for example, here's the key and also is the key. The next factor is the speaker. Speaker can add difficulties in listening processed by their pronunciation and speech style. So about the pronunciation, but the speaker does not possess the close standard accent. This might make the listener could not comprehend the content of the content of the message. And also, when the speaker has the problem with segment or suprasegment, such as intonation, stress, loudness, or speed, it is hard for listeners to deal with comprehension also. And the final one is speech styles. Listener may find it is confused if the speaker has the natural features of speech, such as repetition, self-corrections, and also apparently meaningless additions. The listener can also cause their own difficulties by their listening habits and their listener's ability. So the first one is students would try to understand the word's meaning and they would get stuck if they meet a new word. So this would also cause their difficulty in the listening procedure. Furthermore, students may try to wait for the expected synonym so that they would not recognize the given keywords. This would also prevent them from listening fluency. The next one is listener's ability. So the foreign language students are not familiar enough with the collocations in English to predict for missing words or phrase when they have limitation of vocabulary. Next, student or lack of social, factual, or contextual knowledge would also make the students have difficulties in comprehending the whole meaning of the passage or not get the infer of the text. And finally is having psychology and physical factor. It is tiring for students to concentrate on interpreting unfamiliar word sounds, words for a long period. This would cause demotivation for listener. And finally, is the final factor that causes difficulty in listening procedure is psychology setting, physical setting. So there are basically three smaller features in this section. They are noise, tape quality, and sound. So the first one is noise. Both background noises on the recording and the environmental noises can take the listener minds out of the content. And the next one is the tape quality. Listening materials on tape and radio make students cannot see the speaker body language and facial expression. This might cause difficulty to understand the speaker's meaning. And finally is the sound. The unclear sound resulting from poor quality equipment also interfere with the listener comprehension. So to prevent all of this, teacher can reduce the difficulties as much as possible by focusing on students' vocabulary improvement. Also need to provide a teacher also need to provide students the social, cultural, factual, contextual knowledge, and they also need to break the student habits by giving them more extensive types of listening practice. While they have listening tests, teachers should provide the cutting-edge device for their students and also provide them the silence environment to prevent the background noises. And teachers should also have a look through some common listening criteria such as EEFR to guide the students avoid some difficulty in that level. For example, in the B2 level, teachers should teach learner more about idiom so that they would not meet some difficulty while they have while they're in their listening procedure. Okay, in the final section, we would go to finding materials for listening. So there are basically two types of listening materials, which are authentic materials and textbook materials. The authentic materials are videos and audios materials that students encounter in the daily life, such as songs, public announcement, or even weather forecasts. And the next one is the textbook materials. This one includes simulated lectures and seminars, presentations, and semi-scripted listening tasks from their textbooks. So to reduce learner difficulties and improve their listening skills, the materials should based on the material should base on the appropriate criteria. So here are a few criteria for Here are a few criteria of material selection. The first one is meeting the aim of the course. So the aim of the course is based on the level of learners, and learners might fail into getting any result if the materials is not consistent with the aim of the course. Next one, the listening text is also used for teaching grammar and vocabulary. So therefore, the above criterion is totally necessary in choosing material. And listening materials should offer the teacher opportunities to generate the language activities that based on the content of the materials. By doing so, activities learners may interfere. By doing various activities, learner may interact with the listening text. Next one, the next criterion is that learner cannot guess all the meaning of unfamiliar words through gesture. So to help learners to understand the listening text more easily, reducing unfamiliar words is necessary. So for the students studying for a specific aim, they expect to hear something that relevant to their purpose. Therefore, recorded materials with specific subject matter to some extent should meet the need of students learning foreign language. The content of the record materials must be based on the learner's level, because if the record materials is not suitable for learner's level, there will be a waste of time and this material can bore the learners. The content should have interesting and up-to-date. The listening materials should have the interesting and up-to-date content, because this would attract the learners to attend the listening with the positive attitudes. As a result, their learning will be more effective. By this way, learners can have enjoyment in listening learning and their motivation to study will be raised. Finally is natural speech. Materials chosen for classroom use should be natural, because the aim of listening teaching is to help the learners to be able to use the target language communicatively in real life situations. Next is locating report on the internet. So students can have many disparate types of listening materials like education videos, audiobooks, and radio and television programs. So on the recording on the internet have its own advantage. The first one is it enable the non-native English teacher to provide the audience with variety of English sounds. Next one, the teacher or a student can stop, restart, or even repeat for several times to identify the new knowledge. About its convenience, the recording on the internet can be used automatically by student anytime. Well, in the video-based listening materials, listener can be supported by the pictures or gesture or even mimics. The content, sphere, themes, and phonetic input of the recorded materials is also very colorful and attracts a lot of student attention. And it is also easier to choose and prepare for listening activities beforehand with the help of recorded materials. So about the disadvantage of the recording of the records on the internet is its technical poor quality, because audio and video materials do not always have a good technical quality. Sometimes it is also illegal if the teacher uses the materials without permission, without the source permission, and also as the materials are publicly available on the internet, so the student might know the answer before they having a test. And it is also difficult for the teacher to adapt the suitable level of students while they're using the materials on the internet. So beside on the internet, teacher can making their own records. Teacher can make their own records like live materials or record their own voice. So about the advantage of by doing so, teacher can adapt the content, the level of language, so that it could be more suitable for students. Students would also be more focused on the content of the message if there are less disturbance from the technical background. And about the ability of using visual aids, students can learn how to deal with the gesture or facial expression, as this is a face-to-face interaction practice. And about the language development, students can study for repair strategies such as formalic expression or rephrasing. So what is the disadvantage of making the records by uh, their own? So the demerits is incomplete utterance of speakers. Well, this happens when the teacher possesses poor accent, or the students listen from their peers. This would cause severe consequences for comprehension and also pronunciation. About furthermore, the small segments cannot be repeated, or speech production cannot be stopped artificially, so that students cannot practice intensive listening. So while making the own records, teacher can should have a few notes here. The first one is balance the naturalness of the talk. uh, Balance the naturalness of the talk with the level of the learners. Teachers should also avoid using script when they're making records. Um, while making records, teachers should choose a very quiet place because obviously they do not want some background noises to disturb their students. And finally is when choosing the topic for making records, teachers should also avoid offensive and distressing topics. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.